I did not cry. I did not call her back. I sat in my car in the parking garage of the Marriott Hotel in downtown Columbus, Ohio, and I looked at my phone for a long time. 41 missed calls. I set it face down on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove home. That is where this story ends. But you deserve to know where it started. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 63 years old. I worked for 31 years as a civil engineer for a firm outside of Dayton, and I raised my daughter, my only child, mostly alone. Her mother and I divorced when my daughter was 9. It was not a dramatic divorce. There was no affair, no screaming, no courtroom battle. We simply grew into two different people who wanted two different lives. We split everything fairly, we shook hands, and we both agreed that our daughter came first, always. I kept that promise. Her mother moved to Portland. I stayed in Ohio. And for the next 9 years, from the time my daughter was 9 until she turned 18, I was the one who showed up. I drove her to swim practice at 5:30 in the morning. I sat in the bleachers at every single meet, even the ones on weekday afternoons when I had to leave a job site early. I made dinner most nights, even when it was just pasta and jarred sauce because I was exhausted. I helped with homework I barely understood. I learned how to braid hair from a YouTube tutorial because her mother was 3 time zones away and my daughter wanted braids for her 8th grade dance. I am not telling you this so you will feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so you understand exactly what I had invested and exactly what I was willing to give. When my daughter got into Northeastern University in Boston with a partial academic scholarship, I wept. I actually wept. I was standing in the kitchen when she ran downstairs waving her laptop, and I grabbed her and held her, and I cried. She laughed and told me I was embarrassing. I told her I did not care. The scholarship covered 40% of tuition. The remaining 60%, plus room and board, came to just over $31,000 a year. I had been saving since she was 12. I had a college fund built, and I topped it off by taking on a second consulting contract on weekends during her junior and senior years of high school. I did not tell her how much work that required. I just handled it, the way a father is supposed to handle things. She left for Boston in August of her freshman year. I helped her move in. I carried boxes up 4 flights of stairs in 90-degree heat, and I smiled through all of it. I took her to dinner that night at a nice place near campus, and she ordered salmon and a sparkling water, and she looked so grown up and so confident that I had to stop myself from getting emotional again. I drove back to Ohio the next morning with the windows down and the radio up, and I told myself that this was success, that all the years of early mornings and long nights had produced this, a young woman sitting in a university dining hall in Boston, ready to take on the world. She called regularly that first year. Every Sunday, sometimes twice a week. She told me about her professors, her roommate, a girl named Jade from Atlanta who became her closest friend. She told me about the city, about the tea, about discovering Ethiopian food for the first time. She sounded happy, and her happiness was enough for me. Her sophomore year, she met someone. His name was Garrett. He was a junior, studying business, originally from Greenwich, Connecticut. The first time she mentioned him, I asked the usual father questions. What is he like? Is he kind to you? What does his family do? She answered them all breezily and told me I would love him. I never did meet Garrett that year. She came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but she came alone, said he was spending the holidays with his own family. I thought nothing of it. She seemed happy. Her grades were strong. I wired the second semester payment in January and went back to work. By her junior year, something had shifted. The Sunday calls became irregular, once every 2 weeks, then once a month. When we did talk, she sounded distracted, like she was halfway somewhere else. I asked if everything was okay. She always said yes, just busy. You know how it is, Pa. I told her I understood. That November, she called me on a Tuesday, which was unusual. She told me that she and Garrett had gotten an apartment together off campus. She said it very quickly, like she was ripping off a bandage. I was quiet for a moment. I asked if she thought that was a good idea, considering she was still finishing her degree. She told me I was being old-fashioned. I said, okay, I just want you to be focused. She said she was. That was the end of it. What she did not tell me What I found out much later was that she had stopped putting my name on anything related to her life in Boston. Her lease was in Garrett's name. Her new group of friends were Garrett's friends, mostly from Greenwich and Westport and Darien, kids whose fathers were in finance or law, who summered on Cape Cod, who had never in their lives watched a parent calculate whether a car repair could wait until the next paycheck. When my daughter was around these people, I learned eventually she referred to me only as my dad in Ohio. Said with a certain tone, I was told later, that made Ohio sound like a polite way of saying somewhere else. I paid every semester, on time, in full. I never missed a payment. $31,000 a year, 4 years, not counting the books and the flights home and the money I wired here and there when she said she needed it for something. A winter coat, a laptop upgrade, a textbook that was not covered by financial aid. I never asked for an accounting. She was my daughter. You do not hand your child an invoice. The spring of her senior year, I started thinking about graduation. Northeastern's commencement was scheduled for May, a Saturday. I looked up the ceremony, read about the venue, figured out hotels in the area. I was excited in a way that surprised even me, a clean, uncomplicated excitement, the kind I had not felt in a long time. I had been to every swim meet, every school play, every graduation before this one. This was the last one, the biggest one. I was not going to miss it. In March, I sent my daughter a text asking about graduation plans. I said I wanted to book my hotel early since Boston fills up fast in May. She replied the next day. The reply was short. She said that she and Garrett were actually planning a small celebration with his family and a few close friends, and that the ceremony itself was going to be a lot, and maybe it would just be easier if we celebrated separately, like maybe I could take her to dinner when she came through Ohio over the summer. I read that message 3 times. I set my phone down on my kitchen table. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard I had mowed alone for 22 years, the yard she had played in as a little girl. I stood there for a long time. When I picked my phone back up, I did not respond to that message. Instead, I opened my browser and I looked up the spring semester tuition payment that was due in 4 weeks. $31,240. It was scheduled to process automatically from my account on April 15th. I opened my bank's payment portal and I navigated to scheduled transfers. I am not a man who makes decisions out of anger. I want to be clear about that. I stood in that kitchen for almost an hour. I thought about every angle. I asked myself if I was being reasonable, if I was overreacting, if I was letting my pride get in the way of what was right. I thought about the 9-year-old girl I used to drive to swim practice in the dark. I thought about the YouTube tutorial for braiding hair. I thought about 31 years of showing up. Then I thought about the word easier. Maybe it would just be easier. Easier for whom? Exactly. I canceled the scheduled transfer. I did not send her a message. I did not call. I did not explain myself. I simply logged out of the portal, made a cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with the newspaper. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. I assumed the university had sent some kind of notice to her, but she said nothing to me. I started to wonder if she had not noticed, or if Garrett's family had quietly covered it, the way families with money in Greenwich cover things without blinking. Then, on a Thursday night in early April, my phone rang. It was my daughter. I answered. She did not say hello. She said, "Pa, what happened to the tuition payment?" I said, "I canceled it." There was a silence so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. She said, "What do you mean you canceled it? My account is on hold. I cannot register for my final exams. I could lose my degree." I said, "I know." She said, "Pa, what is going on? Why would you do that?" I said, "I want you to think back to the message you sent me in March." She said, "What message?" I said, "The one about graduation." Another silence. Shorter this time. She said, "Pa, that is not, I didn't mean anything by that. It was just about logistics." I said, "It was about something more than logistics, but I am not going to argue with you about it." She said, "You cannot do this. I have worked 4 years for this degree." I said, "I know. I was there for all 4 years. I paid for all 4 years." She said, "So you're punishing me? You're holding my graduation hostage?" I said, "I am not punishing anyone. I simply decided not to make a payment." She said, "Pa, please, please don't do this. I am so close." I said, "I love you. I will talk to you soon." And I hung up. I want to be honest with you about what that felt like, because I think people assume that a moment like that feels powerful or satisfying. It did not. It felt like something tearing, a slow and necessary tearing, the way you have to sometimes break a bone that healed wrong so it can heal right. I sat in my kitchen after that phone call and I did not feel victorious. I felt tired and sad and clear. For the first time in years, I felt clear. The calls started the next morning. Her, then Garrett, then a number I did not recognize that I later figured out was his mother. I let all of them go to voicemail. By the end of the first day, there were 11 missed calls. By the end of the second day, 23. By Friday evening, I stopped counting and just looked at the screen occasionally, watching the number climb. On Saturday morning, my daughter showed up at my house. I heard the car in the driveway and I knew it was her before I looked. I went to the door and opened it before she could knock. She was standing on my porch in a gray sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back, and she looked younger than she had in years, younger and more like herself. Garrett was not with her. She had driven from Boston alone, 8 hours, and arrived before 9 in the morning, which meant she had left in the middle of the night. She looked at me and she started to say something, and then she stopped. She pressed her lips together and she looked at the ground. I said, "Come inside." She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had made every decision in this story. I made coffee. She did not speak until I set the mug in front of her. She said, "I don't know when I became that person." I sat down across from her and waited. She said, "I've been so caught up in Garrett's world, in how his family does things, how his friends see things. I think I started to feel like I don't know, like where I came from was something to manage. And you were part of what I was managing." I said, "Tell me more about that." She talked for a long time, about the subtle pressures, the way Garrett's mother commented on certain things, the way she had started measuring her own life against a standard that had nothing to do with how she was raised or what actually mattered. She talked about how she had slowly, without quite realizing it, started editing me out, not replacing me, just reducing me, moving me to the margins, so she could feel more comfortable in rooms where she felt she did not fully belong. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I said, "I need you to understand something. Every decision I made in the last 18 years was made for you, not for me. Not to buy your gratitude or your obligation, because you were worth it. You are still worth it. But worth it does not mean available for anything at any cost. There is a version of loving you that requires me to stop pretending that what you did was acceptable." She nodded. She was crying quietly, not dramatically, just tears running down her face while she kept her hands wrapped around the mug. I said, "I need you to decide what kind of relationship you want with me. A real one, with me as I actually am, where I come from, how I show up, or a managed one, where I stay in Ohio and congratulate you by text when it is convenient. I cannot do the second one anymore." She said, "I want the real one. I am so sorry, Pa. I want to tell you that everything was resolved in that kitchen on that Saturday morning, that we cried together and hugged and the story ended cleanly. It did not, quite. Real things do not end cleanly." There was more conversation over the following weeks. There was a difficult phone call with Garrett, who was polite but cool, who I think saw me with clearer eyes than I saw him. There were things that needed to be said about what my daughter expected from that relationship and whether those expectations were being met. That was not my business to sort out, and I did not try. What I did do was make the tuition payment, the full balance, including the late fee, 10 days after my daughter drove back to Boston. I called the bursar's office myself and confirmed it had cleared. She called me that evening, not to thank me exactly, but just to talk. About nothing, about everything. About a professor she admired, about the neighborhood she and Jade had found for their graduation dinner. She mentioned the neighborhood casually, the way you mention something that is already understood, already shared. I was already part of the plan. She did not have to say it explicitly because it did not need to be said. I flew into Boston on a Friday. I took a cab from Logan to the hotel I had booked back in January, the one I had almost canceled 100 times over the past 2 months. It was a good hotel, not extravagant, clean and well situated, close to campus. I had packed a navy suit and a tie my daughter had given me 2 Christmases ago, still in the original box. I pressed the shirt myself the night before the ceremony. On the morning of graduation, I walked across campus in that suit, in May sunshine, in a city I had been to exactly 3 times in my life. I found my seat in the family section. I had a small American flag that I had bought at a CVS on the way, the kind with the little plastic stick, because she had always loved seeing flags in crowds at ceremonies since she was a little girl and I used to take her to 4th of July parades. I held it in my hand and I waited. When they called her name, her full name, her first and middle and last, my last name, the name we both share, she walked across that stage in her cap and gown, and she found me immediately in the crowd. I do not know how she spotted me so fast in all those people, but she did, and she pointed, and she smiled so wide I could see it from 50 rows back. I stood up. I waved the flag. The people around me laughed at the flag, but kindly, the way people laugh at something genuine. She came and found me after, still in her gown, Jade at her side, and she hugged me for a long time in the middle of the crowd. She whispered something in my ear that I am going to keep between the 2 of us. That evening, the 3 of us, my daughter and Jade and I, had dinner at a Portuguese restaurant near the waterfront that my daughter had found and reserved weeks earlier. It had white tablecloths and good wine and the kind of quiet bustle that makes a room feel warm. She ordered for the table because she knew the city and I let her, and I watched her be confident and bright and generous with Jade and with the waiter, and I recognized her again, fully, the way I had not in a long time. At some point over dessert, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "I keep thinking about all those swim meets." I said, "I never missed one." She said, "I know. I've always known." On the flight home the next day, I looked out the window at the cloud cover over Connecticut, over New York, over the flat familiar green of Pennsylvania, beginning to give way to Ohio. I thought about the $31,000 a year. I thought about the canceled payment and the 41 missed calls and the Saturday morning at the kitchen table. I thought about what it costs to raise a child and what it costs to keep them, and how those 2 things are not the same cost and do not feel the same way. I thought about the flag with the little plastic stick, the one she had tucked into the pocket of her gown when she came to find me after the ceremony, and carried with her all through dinner and set on the restaurant table next to her wine glass, like it was something she intended to keep. I think it is something she intended to keep. The plane descended through the clouds. The Ohio farmland spread out below, green and flat and honest. I collected my bag from the overhead bin, walked up the jet bridge, and drove myself home. I mowed the yard that afternoon, the whole yard, front and back, in the late afternoon light. I did not have my phone with me. I did not need to. There was no one I needed to hear from, and nothing I needed to say. Some things do not require words. They require time, and honesty, and the willingness to stop pretending. They require knowing exactly what you are worth, and being unwilling to accept less. Not out of bitterness, but out of respect for yourself, and ultimately, for the person you love. My daughter called that Sunday, the way she used to. We talked for almost an hour, about nothing, about everything. She said she had framed her diploma and hung it in the hallway of the new apartment she was moving into, alone this time, a fresh start in a new neighborhood. She said there was a wall near the window where she was thinking of putting some photographs. She asked if I could send her one of the 2 of us from graduation day. I said I would send her several.